So hello and welcome to Kitty Talks. We share inspirational life stories that empower you to create your own life. And today I'm really excited about the gentleman I'm about to introduce you to. I discovered his work actually through another ladies' podcast I was on. And I straight away went out and bought his first book, the Book of Dharma. And I absolutely absorbed it because it's absolutely fascinating. And Simon is an incredible writer. And so today on the podcast, we have Simon Haas. He is, an incredible man. You're about to hear his life story, but he is a teacher of yoga and philosophy. And he's an author of 2 books. So one of which is The Dark Night of the Soul. And the other one is the Book of Dharma. So Simon, thank you so much for coming on Kitty Talks. Welcome.
Hello, Kitty. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
And Simon has joined us, just for you guys listening. Simon is all the way in Costa Rica, which is incredible. I love the fact that we have this technology now. But just to give you a heads up, guys, he's in Costa Rica and it's a pretty noisy place. So we may have a little bit of background noise on this podcast, but you're going to hear some great content. So stay tuned. So Simon, would you mind introducing yourself to my audience and just telling them a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world?
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here on this show. I'm a teacher of Dharma and yoga philosophy, and I travel and give workshops and seminars internationally. But much more than that, I consider myself to be a servant, and I love sharing these teachings, especially the teachings of Dharma. I've seen how, through my own personal experience, just how powerful they are and how transformative they are. They've had such an impact in my own life that I know that they can help anyone. So I love sharing them.
Oh, and I so echo what you just said, Simon, because that's, we're on the same mission. I am so empowered by helping others grow and create amazing lives, by using these teachings. So yeah, we're definitely on the same mission. But would you mind sorry, carry on.
Oh, just that whenever I share any of these teachings, I always let my audience or readers know that for me it's a privilege because it allows me to deepen my own practice. So in that sense, the people that I'm speaking to or speaking with, I consider them to be my teacher. So yeah, it's always a pleasure.
Absolutely, absolutely, and they say that you teach what you need to learn most.
That's right.
Yes. And would you agree with that?
I would, yeah. It definitely it deepens one's own practice. And of course, we'll talk about this a little bit further, but the teachings of Dharma, we all apply them to some extent or other. So to hear the life experiences of others and what they've been through, especially through the lens of Dharma, it can help us apply the principles of Dharma more deeply ourselves.
And actually, that was one of the inspirations for the podcast, actually, Simon, by sharing, by sharing life stories, people could see themselves, their own journey in other people's life stories. So yeah, we're definitely on the same mission. But would you mind taking us back? Because one of the things that we do on Kitty Talks is we love to tell our audience and share with our audience the transformational story and the transformational journey. Because as I just said, they will be able to see themselves in your life story. So take me back to when you were a little Simon Haas.
Well, when I was a young boy at the age of 13, my initial interest was actually in archaeology. So I began looking at the ancient texts of India. I don't know if you've heard of Schliemann. Schliemann's a German archaeologist. And at that time, he was looking deeply at the classics of ancient Greece. And he thought these stories, there must be something more to them than just stories. At that time, people thought there was no historical basis to them. So he formed a team of archaeologists and went out to what is present-day Turkey and discovered the foundations of the ancient city of Troy. So from a young age, from my my father's library, I began reading the Ramayana, the Mahabharata classics of India. And
Wow.
I thought, well, there must be something more to it than just stories. Perhaps I could discover some. So I began studying archaeology. I began studying Sanskrit, and I entered into these texts as deeply as I could. But what I found there was so exciting, so much more, so much more valuable than artifacts buried in the ground or under the ocean, that I gradually, my interest, my focus shifted. I became um, much more captivated and interested by the ancient teachings, the wisdom teachings of India. So, in particular, it describes how practicing these yoga teachings or Dharma teachings, they're designed to remove suffering from our life, especially suffering associated with time. So that's fear, lamentation, and confusion. Fear is misery or suffering associated with the future, lamentation with the past, and confusion with the present.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, I mean, how interesting and how exciting. So as I studied these texts, I found myself at a little bit of an impasse. I couldn't enter into them so deeply.
And can I just say, like, you said you were 13 when you were studying these texts.
I was, yeah.
And
yeah.
was this in your kind of sphere of influence? Was your dad into, like, because it's not normal for a normal 13-year-old or was this just something you sought out, like, because it was deep within you?
My father was in the hippie era. So he was very interested in ancient knowledge from India in particular. He loved the Beatles, especially George Harrison. And he had met various teachers from India. And so he had a beautiful library, and the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, these texts, I began reading them from a very young age.
Makes sense. And they say we choose our parents. So obviously you chose your dad for that reason.
And but I couldn't enter them into those texts so deeply. And the reason for that is that the genre of self-help is something that didn't exist in ancient India. It's something from contemporary Western society. So those viewers who have maybe tried to access the Bhagavad Gita directly, if you've had any difficulties doing so, that's completely normal. It's a very difficult text. They're actually much more like teachers' manuals. They're designed for teachers to use them to teach. And each verse, each line contains like a universe of meaning, great depth in each of the Sanskrit verses. So I knew I needed to find a teacher. The Bhagavad Gita itself speaks about ancient lineages of teachers where the wisdom of the Gita and the sacred text is passed down from master to student for thousands of years. So I was really interested to go to India and learn in a living tradition. So as a teenager, I traveled to India.
Wow.
And I went to Mathura, the area of Mathura and Braj, which is in Uttar Pradesh, central North India. It's actually the birthplace of Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita. And I thought, here might be able to find a teacher. I met my teacher there. At that time he was in his 70s. In 2010 he left this world at the age of about 90 years old. And I had the very good fortune of studying with him, for living in India for 10 years and then apprenticing with him for 16 years. And studying in great depth these teachings of Dharma, teachings of the Gita.
And how did you come to get connected to him in the first instance? So as a teen, like, I'm fascinated by this. As a teenager, you took yourself to India. Was it a synchronicity that led you to him? Like, how did that come about?
Yes, a synchronicity. I would say he found me. In India, I was looking for a teacher in the area of Braj and Mathura, and I did. It's like a ritual. anyone who travels to, if you travel to some of the sacred places to India, like Vrindavan, you will see people doing this. It's a part of it's an aspect of yoga that is perhaps lost in translation a little bit in the Western world. It's called pranam, and dandavat pranam is like a prostration with one's whole body. So there is an ancient custom of doing full body prostrations around Vrindavan, which is quite a few miles actually. And you pick a stone and you do a prostration and lay it out in front of you and make a prayer and stand up behind the stone, pick it up and do that again. And you cover the whole distance with the length of your body. And it's an incredible ritual that has many deep meanings. For one thing, it cultivates a deep mood of humility, with your entire body, your heart touching the earth. And it quietens the mind, and you begin to hear a much deeper voice. And so having completed that, I prayed to find a teacher who could help me in my own journey of the soul. And within a couple of days after that, I met my teacher.
Wow. And that's just an incredible story in itself, like that a 13-year-old boy studied all of the text at home and then took it upon himself to then travel to India. How are your parents about this?
The very first time I went to India, which was at the age of, I think it may have been at the age of 14, was with my dad.
Right.
And then later I went again and I lived in India, and that was on my own. My father's always been very supportive, and he has actually always given me quite a lot of room because, unfortunately, my mother died when I was very young, and it has been difficult for my father to look after me and my siblings, and so he's given me. He always gave me quite a lot of space for self-discovery and exploring the world. And at that time in India, of course, it's, now you go and travel around the world, or you travel to India, you can send texts or WhatsApp to people on the furthest corners of the world. At that time, there was no internet and no email either, really. If you wanted to write back home, it would be on an aerogram. And you would send it, and it would take, maybe a month or 6 weeks to arrive, if it even arrived. So the distances were far greater in that sense than now. And living in the monastery, in Temple Monastery in India, it also wasn't very, not an easy thing. There was a language barrier. I had to begin learning Hindi or Bengali.
Wow.
And but like the other monks, I slept on the floor on a thin straw mat and shaved my head, and woke up in the morning. We'd wake up in the morning very early at about 3:30 or 4 and begin meditation. But what an incredible life. I wouldn't trade it for anything else.
Amazing. Carry on.
I was going to say one thing that is a tradition in India is also not just simply teaching from in an academic way. Most of the learning would actually be by seeing the example of monks and teachers. So that's something that that's so important. So in looking at, for example, at the principles of Dharma, it would not be simply a matter of learning things intellectually. The sacred texts of India are actually not intended to give us information. They're intended to create transformation. So if we're not actually living them, they just remain good ideas. And we have enough good ideas in the world. We need a bit more than that.
I totally agree. And can you explain for our audience, because we discussed before we came on air how the word Dharma has a lot of different meanings depending on the language, the different Indian culture or tradition. So could you just talk to me a little bit more about that? Because I think you and I come from slightly different angles, which is fascinating for me.
Well, yes, the Sanskrit word dharma, it comes from the Sanskrit verbal root dri, which means to uphold or to support. So we'll have a look at that in a moment, but it has different meanings according to context. So in Buddhism, Dharma means the teachings of the Buddha. So, and in the Vedic tradition, there are a few meanings. One of them is often people will translate dharma as purpose or one's calling, and that's svadharma. So, in other words, one's own dharma, one's purpose or calling. So the Gita speaks about that, and that's a very important and very interesting, fascinating topic. But dharma is right action. It's when the quality of our thoughts, words, and actions are such that the universe actually supports us in our efforts.
Yeah, see, it's fascinating because the way it's been taught to me is that it's the path of right action, action for the individual and for humanity at the same time, which actually correlates to what you're saying.
Yes. And so often it speaks about the path of dharma, and the sacred texts, different sacred texts discuss aspects of dharma. In the Bhagavad Purana, there's a beautiful section that speaks about the 4 principles of dharma. 4 principles that when lived, when actively lived as dynamic principles in our life, then dharma manifests in our life.
And for you guys listening, this is Simon's book. So he's written about these books in the Book of Dharma. And this, for me, was absolutely fascinating because it's a different angle, slightly different take on, I suppose, where I've been taught and how I would necessarily teach my students. But what I loved about it is, like you said, it's living into Dharma by adopting the principles of truth. Dharma naturally comes into your life. So would you be open to sharing the 4 principles with our audience?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. 4 principles: truth, or satya, truth, purity, non-violence or ahimsa, and discipline. So these principles are universal principles. So it's not something that is confined to one particular culture, the Vedic tradition or the Puranic tradition. We find these 4 principles everywhere in all traditions in the world, and that reflects a spiritual journey that anyone can take, and that cuts across gender, culture, background, and historical times. So most important, of course, is truth. Everything begins with truth, and the Mahabharata sometimes equates truth with dharma. And so we can perhaps have a quick look at each of these 4 principles.
Please, yeah.
When we live them together, we all apply them to some extent. We all apply a certain degree of truth, a certain degree of nonviolence, some discipline, but often not so consistently, and often not all 4 principles at the same time. So usually what happens, in my experience, is that if we have a problem or a difficulty, we immediately go for one particular principle, which is discipline or effort. So we throw as much effort into the issue that we have, the challenge that we have. But if our effort is not aligned with truth, if our effort isn't coming from a pure place, if our effort is violent to ourselves and to others, it doesn't actually resolve the problem that we have, it only exacerbates it. So all 4 principles need to be applied together. And these 4 principles are like sutras, what's known as a sutra. The word sutra in Sanskrit means the tip of a thread. So maybe if we use a modern analogy, I think all of your viewers will have probably had the experience of having a roll of sellotape or some kind of tape and trying to find the end of it.
Great, yeah.
You put it in the light, you look for the end, you run your fingernail around it, until you finally get that end. Once you have that, you can open it up, unwrap, and use that tape for anything that you need. So in ancient India, they didn't have plastics, they didn't have sellotape, so they used the analogy of a spool of thread. If you can locate the tip, then you can unravel the spool, and the thread may actually extend for many hundreds of yards. So these four principles, these four words, truth, purity, nonviolence, and discipline, they're just the tip of the thread. And the rishis or sages of India have given us some indication of what that tip of the thread is. But then it's for us in our own life to explore that and to unravel it and see where it takes us.
So obviously truth is pretty self-explanatory. You know, it's around speaking our truth, telling the truth. Anything else you'd like to add?
Right. Yeah. That's a very important aspect of it. Other aspects are being true to who we are.
Okay.
And that's an aspect I love emphasizing, because in our Western society, there are a lot of forces that push us away from being true to who we are. There are very particular ideas of what it means to be successful. And those may be forced upon us even by family or parents. They may be imposed upon us by friends. Every time we open up a magazine or watch the television, there are these ideas of success that are imposed upon us, and those ideas may sometimes cause us not to have the courage to actually follow our own, to be true to who we are, to our own personality and nature. So I don't know if you've heard of a nurse named Bronnie Ware. She's a palliative nurse, so she looks after patients who are sure to die. It's just a matter of how long. So she thought to herself, I'm not simply going to care for these patients, I'm also going to see if I can learn something from them, because awareness of our mortality has a way of giving us a perspective that is often lost in everyday life. So she began asking her patients different questions. What in your life do you feel has gone really well? Would you do anything differently? Do you have any regrets? And there was one regret that kept coming up again and again and again. What's the number one regret of dying patients? I wish I'd had the courage to lead a life true to myself rather than the life others expected of me. No, that's the number one regret. So how important being true to one's nature, being true to oneself is. And that same teaching is found in the Gita thousands of years earlier. Krishna tells the warrior Arjuna, it's better to be true to oneself, even if we make many mistakes doing so, than to follow another's path and do that perfectly. So we can have all the trappings of success. We can follow a particular, career that's deemed successful. We can have the big car, the large pay package and everything. And outwardly, it can look perfect. But if we're not true to who we are, to our nature, we'll never feel fulfilled. We'll always feel dissatisfied and empty in what we're doing.
Yeah, fascinating. Because I think one of the things I work with my students is getting them to uncover and discover themselves.
That's amazing.
Because we don't do it, do we? Like you said, we have this view of how we're supposed to live our lives. And then that was what happened for me. I got into my corporate career, and when it was serving and helping people, I loved it. And then as soon as it shifted around just, money, it just didn't work for me. So, I think it's interesting you say that, because I think our society tells us one thing, but then our heart and soul tells us something else. And we think, what's wrong with us,
Yes, that's right. And we have to make these career choices very early in life. Children are obligated to decide what subjects to study and at college and university. And there are many considerations that they take into account, like, will it give financial security? Is it looked upon well? And will it please my parents? I don't want to dismiss those considerations, but perhaps the most important consideration is it true to who I am? Does it fit with my personality, with my nature? That's hardly ever discussed.
And it's so important that we work in alignment with who we are, because then, like exactly like you said, that's when you've become alive, because you're in your genius zone, you're flowing, you're doing what you love, and life takes on a different form almost.
In your genius form. I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The thing about truth is that it's self-sustaining. That's why it's sometimes truth is equated with dharma, because truth is self-sustaining. It doesn't require any additional effort on our part.
It's who we are.
Yeah. So like truth, you can kick it about as much as you like. It'll retain its shape. But a falsehood, when we're false to ourselves or to others, it requires a lot of work to maintain. To maintain a lie is a huge,
it's a lot of energy,
burdensome.
But we we wear masks, don't we? Like we
That's
kind
of, and it leads to fear, anxiety. It takes up a lot of our emotional energy. But truth is self-sustaining. So if we can build our life on truth, the life we build is supported by the universe itself.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, because you see, when you're talking, I'm relating it back to the way I've been taught about that. And so the way my teacher would explain that is when you work in alignment with your unique gifts and talents and your passions, which again is your truth, because they are your unique passions and your unique talents. And when you go in alignment with that, and there's this element of social need, then you're in your dharmic flow, you're in your dharmic path.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's very, very aligned. So you got truth. And then could you explain a bit more about purity? Because I think, for our listeners, that's not such an obvious one.
The word in Sanskrit is shaucha. So if for any of for any of our listeners and viewers, if the English word purity has any kind of connotations you don't like, then the Sanskrit is shaucha. And we are generally very careful what we consume in terms of food and drink, right? So we like to have pure food, pure water, organic if we can, and we don't want to ingest things that are toxic for us. But actually, we're eating, or drinking, not just through our mouth, but through all of our senses, through our eyes, through our ears. What we listen to, what we view, what we think about, but we may not have the same standards for the other senses in which we consume the world, so to speak. So purity is the ability to be able to differentiate between what helps us and what harms us, and to be careful in what we accept within us. So someone who's practicing this principle of purity, they'll be a little bit careful. They'll have respect and love for everyone, but they'll choose their friends wisely. They will choose their workplace wisely if that's possible. And if we're in a toxic environment, work environment, that's very aggressive perhaps, or that has a lot of office politics and so on, that will naturally have an effect on us. It cannot but have an effect on us. So being a little bit careful in the way that we allow ourselves to be influenced in the world by our surroundings is what the principle of purity is about.
Fascinating. Yeah, because I think the way I was taught that was who you surround yourself is with who you become. So yeah.
Oh, that's very well put. Yes. In the sacred text of India, it's described that consciousness is like a crystal or a diamond. If you have a clear diamond and you place it against something that's red, it'll shine red. Against something that's blue, it'll shine blue. So we take on the qualities of those with whom we're around naturally, and they take on our qualities also.
They say that you're the sum of the 4 people that you spend the most time with. So from that, but they've actually studied it, Simon, around how much money you earn. You're dressing the same, kind of sort of similar beliefs. So yeah, I do ask my students to look who they hang around with. Very important. So that brings us on to the third principle.
Non-violence.
Non-violence.
So before looking at ahimsa, just to give an indication of how potent these principles are, think, for example, of the of Mahatma Gandhi. So Mahatma Gandhi, he tried to apply these principles. So his movement was called Satyagraha, which means seizing truth, not letting go of truth. And he used the principle of ahimsa, non-violence. And Mahatma Gandhi, he didn't have any, incredible political connections. He didn't have a bank balance. He had just a few dhotis, a few pieces of cloth. An elderly, fragile man was able to defeat the largest empire in the world at that time, the British Empire, by applying these 4 principles of Dharma. So imagine how, what these principles can do for us with the small problems we have in our lives.
So obviously with the principle of non-violence, like obviously that, how would you relate that to sort of modern day life?
So I have found that the best way to apply that is by becoming more aware of our footprint of violence. We can be violent to each other. We can be violent to the earth. We can be violent to ourselves. So very important, I find. Well, now
to ourselves, of course, yeah. Because how we talk to ourselves, you would never talk to another human being the way we sometimes speak to ourselves.
That's very well put. Yeah. Exactly. So, we all create these stories. We're an author of our own life story, and we carry our story with us wherever we go. It's like the script from which we lead our life, and we're the lead character in our story. And to have a story is not a problem, but we take our story so seriously that we're prepared to, lose our friends over it, fight for our story, and we rarely stop to consider, what's the nature of the story that we're living out? What are we saying to ourselves day in, day out? I'm not good enough. I must work harder. I must make myself more lovable and attractive. This person, she's helping me get what I want. She's my friend. That person's my competition. What if he gets there before I do? I mustn't allow that to happen. I mustn't lose this. Without this particular thing, I'm no one. So we hardly stop to think, are these statements even true? And how violent they are to ourselves and to others. So the ability to step back from the stories of our life, not take them so seriously, and is a way of becoming less violent to ourselves. Another way of becoming less violent to ourselves is being true to who we are. Every time we're not true to who we are, it's a form of violence.
Yes, and when you look at that, that's as big as or as small as not owning our own worth, or staying in a job. If you want to make it a comparable, it's staying in a job, for example, when the job isn't serving us and we're worth more and they're underpaying us. It's as things like that, isn't it? To give people kind of comparable examples. Knowing our worth.
I mean, if we make a timeline, imagine a timeline from 0 to 80. 80 years, well, our average lifespan for a male is 76, for a female is 74. So let's be generous and say 80. We might live much longer. We might live a lot less than that. The first maybe 20 years of our life were children and students. The last, I'm not sure, what's the retirement age in the UK? 65?
65, yeah.
65. So from 65 to 80, it's a period of retirement, and we can pursue activities that perhaps and hobbies we might not have had time to do before. So it's great being children and students, and it's great having time at the age of retirement. But what about all the time in between? If we're not happy in the work that we're doing, we're actually setting ourselves up to be unhappy for the majority of our life. What a violent thing that is to do. I think, in my experience, most people, they hate their jobs.
Yes.
Their favorite day is Friday, and their worst day of the week is Monday. But life isn't meant to be like that, and it doesn't have to be like that. When someone pursues someone's true to their calling and pursues their dharma, they have the immediate effect of being aligned with truth is great vitality. If we're feeling great vitality in our life, it's a sign that we're connected with truth. If we feel drained and our energy is being sapped from us, that's an indicator that we're not in alignment with truth. So one thing that often in seminars and workshops participants ask is, well, I have a job and I have to pay the bills. I can't just leave it and do what I would love to do. And that may be the case. So what I normally reply is, at least make a space for doing what you really love. Make some space in your life for doing something that's aligned with who you are. And what happens, in my experience, is that space begins to grow. As soon as we honor truth, the universe responds.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I did a workshop recently, Simon, and, some of the participants were like, well, I don't know what I'm passionate about anymore. They'd lost touch so much with what life was about. And, I think we can do that if we're not careful, because we get ingrained in, like you said, this way of being, which is go to school, go to work, earn this money, come home and live for the weekends. And life should not be like that. And the examples of the people I've interviewed, this is the whole point of doing the interviews, because when we do our Dharma, life opens up in an incredibly magical, synchronistic way.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this,
what you said about
it's worth doing it.
Kitty, I love what you said about becoming not becoming so aware anymore of what our nature, what our purpose is, what our
passions and
passions and qualities and personality is. What I sometimes do is, in a workshop, I have some semi-precious stones that I put out on a cloth, on a white cloth, and there's some tiger's eyes, there are a few opals, quartz crystals, rose quartz, and I ask participants to pick one that they immediately find beautiful, that really kind of charms them or captivates them, and to hold it in the palm of their hand and not to look at it or to show anyone. So then we continue, maybe 20, 25 minutes afterwards, I then ask a few individuals in the group, what gemstone did you pick? Don't look at it, but what gemstone did you pick? And usually there's, about 50%, maybe just, close to 50% of participants, they actually don't remember anymore. They can feel they're holding a gemstone, but they don't quite remember. Was it rose quartz or quartz crystal? What color was it? So if that jewel is like our nature, then imagine ignoring our nature, not for 25 minutes, but for 25 years, or 30 years, or 40 years. We still can feel that we have, we have a nature, but we might not be able to really easily identify anymore what it is. So there are different ways, yoga methods, like karma yoga, a beautiful method for actually awakening and manifesting our nature.
And take us through the final principle. So we've gone through, obviously, the first three.
Discipline. In Sanskrit, it's tapas, which actually means heat. So, imagine you're making here they have an incredible dish called arroz con leche, which is like a rice pudding. Rice and so any dish that you make, if you make rice or you make arroz con leche, you can have your ingredients. You can have your sugar, your rice, your water. You can have your pots. Everything can be there, but you'll never be able to make it unless you have heat. So in the same way, these 4 principles of Dharma, we can have everything in place, but until we bring it into action, then nothing really happens. Everything remains very intellectual. It remains very much on the level of thoughts only. So discipline is what allows us to, what brings um, uh, the heat of discipline brings to life the four principles of Dharma.
Mm.
But importantly, discipline, tapas, has to be in alignment with truth, purity, and non-violence. So I think maybe, these English words are sometimes a little bit tricky.
Give
People
you a
may
slightly
associate,
different meaning.
right? People may associate discipline with kind of forced discipline forced upon them. But someone who practices tapas in the right way, they feel great vitality. Like I think everyone has an experience of this where when they're really doing what they love, they can spend all day, all night on it, and they may even forget to eat or sleep. And they don't feel drained of energy. They feel like they have more energy.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think one of the things that I will always talk to people about is action, because like you said, the principles of Dharma can't come to play unless we take the action. And one of the things I'm always talking to my students about is how the next step becomes obvious, but you have to take the first step. How we get clarity through engagement.
Right.
So
yes.
We tend to talk ourselves out of something. We have a great idea. We have an understanding of what our passion, our Dharma is, what we want to go towards, but we don't necessarily take the action. And in doing and taking the action, I've always found that this beautiful path unveils itself to you, but you have to get in the game.
That's right. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And what I loved in your book was how you use these principles when you're living your life and you embody them. And the example you gave in the book, which I really liked, was about a woman that you worked with. And would you share that example for our audience? Because obviously she was quite tricky for you to work with. So if you wouldn't mind, just because I think it's a great example of how we can embody these principles and use them in our everyday life. So,
right. So yeah, I do legal work with different with clients in the US and also in the UK, and that often as part of that work, I was working with an investment bank in the US and the head of PR and marketing at that time, and usually I get along with everyone really easily.
You strike me as that type. It's all the meditation, really relaxed and chilled out.
But on this occasion, I really struggled, and it surprised me.
Yeah.
I really struggled, and the reason for it, I think, was that this particular head of PR and marketing, she would change plans very quickly, and at that time I was living in the UK, and of course the time difference between California and the UK is quite significant. So
7 hours.
I think 9:00 a.m. in California is 5 p.m. in the UK.
That's
so
7, isn't it? I think it's
maybe.
Yeah, 9 and 3, I think, or yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So if there was a change of plan at 9:00, that would be my evening, and I'd have to work through the night. And so that that created a lot of difficulty. And having spent a few nights up, another issue that I had was that if there was a sensitive problem that needed to be resolved, then she would copy in all of the senior managers in her reply. And personally, I struggle with that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to put an end to that. So I began writing an email to her explaining how this wasn't working. And I thought, okay, I'm going to copy in all of the managers in my response as well. And it took quite a bit of time crafting this email. When you do something that you shouldn't really be doing, everything takes double the amount of energy or more. It's no longer effortless effort. And I was just about to hit the send button. But we all have an inner guide in our heart that speaks to us. And I knew intuitively that this wasn't the right thing to do. So I stepped back and I thought, well, let me consider this through the principles of Dharma. And I looked at truth. And to me, it seemed to be, truthful, to be letting everyone know what was happening. It's transparent, so it's in alignment with truth. And then I went to non-violence. Actually, of the 4 principles of Dharma, non-violence is the most important. If there ever appears to be a conflict between the principles, there never is actually, but sometimes intellectually, if you look at a principle, and if there's an apparent conflict, always privilege non-violence. So I was looking at non-violence, and in doing that, considering the situation that she was in. And I began to see things that I had just been blinded to before. So, of course, investment banking is a very male-dominated industry. And it can be very difficult for women to succeed in that industry, not because they're not capable. They're highly capable, in many ways, I believe, more capable than men. But because it's so male-dominated, it's a very aggressive environment. And I realized that she had only been at that company for a few months. And of all the work that she had to do, the work she was doing with me was just a very small amount of a huge mountain of responsibilities. So in looking at that and considering that more deeply, my understanding of truth just completely broadened. And that's the nature of nonviolence and truth.
It works together.
If our nonviolence isn't flourishing, our truth also won't flourish, and the other way around. If we're closed in truth, we will tend to be violent to ourselves and others. So, I then decided to reach out to her and to write her an email, and I decided I would copy in the whole of the company. But rather than explaining everything that wasn't working, I wrote an email thanking her and listing all the various things that she was doing extremely well. And what a pleasure it was to send that email. And having sent it, it completely changed the dynamics in our working relationship. Instead of it created the trust, and it created a space where I could then privately speak to her and tell her, what was a little bit challenging for me. And we found solutions to that, and we ended up working on many, many projects that were very successful. So it's an example, simple example of
but it's It's a great example, because I think, especially when we're having some type of perceived conflict, and obviously it's only our own perception, really, that we do go down to what this person is doing wrong, whereas actually probably in reality. But I was reading your book, Simon, actually, and I was going through a period with I run a non-profit organization, and I have a partner, and she's quite a bit older than me. And, sometimes we don't see eye to eye. And actually, I remember I was reading your book at the same time, and it enabled me to look at things in a different perspective. And I was communicating with her at that time, and I wanted to go to, you're doing this, and this, and it's really annoying me. But when I was reading your book simultaneously, it made me step back. And I went to her, when I wrote to her, I said, I admire and respect you for all of these reasons, and it enabled me to write to her in a frame of mind, because I took that step back. And like you said, you see this person and all their beautiful attributes. And of course, this tiny aspect that we get stuck on is such a, so it was wonderful, because I then wrote to her in that capacity. And like you said, it opened a beautiful space for us then to work through the other minority bit, which we were struggling with. So thank you. I thank you for that, because the timing was a wonderful synchronicity. Yeah. But I have to say, I could talk to you probably all day.
So could I, Kitty.
We haven't even got into the parallels between, because obviously you're describing Dharma from how you've been learnt it, and then what I'm doing over here is I'm going, well, this is kind of this element of what I look at. And so I'd love to continue that conversation with you, because I just find it so fascinating. But I'm also conscious of time. So how can people find you, Simon? Because I would thoroughly recommend anyone listening to this to read the Book of Dharma, because it is a beautiful book. And Simon explains things in a very simply, actually, which I like. So how can people find you, Simon? How can they find you in the world?
Well, thank you, Kitty. You can find me on my website, which is simonhaas.com. So Haas spelled Haas, simonhaas.com. I'm also on social media, so Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Simon Haas Author.
Fabulous. And we will have all of Simon's details in the show notes. But I would suggest you listen to that episode at least 3 times, because you will hear different things at different points and you'll be able to translate them into your own life. But Simon, thank you so much for taking the time. I know, obviously you're in Costa Rica, but I really appreciate you coming on Kitty Talks and sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Kitty. It's been such a pleasure.
And we will see you next week with another amazing guest on Kitty Talks. Bye-bye. This podcast was sponsored by my Do Your Dharma course. Create a life so good that you pinch yourself. This 8-week online course demystifies Dharma and shows you how to tune in to why you're really here. Go to www.kittytalks.com/do your Dharma.